Okay. So yes, I'll go back right to the beginning. Okay, living with energy. This is what we're going to be talking about tonight. Forget of everything I just said earlier on because you wouldn't have heard it. But living with energy. Is it easy to live with energy and so forth? And I thought the best way to explain it would be to explain the journey that I went through from about sort of 20 to 25 to start with, when I was really young, getting fully on into the energy side of things. And when it was, to be honest, its most, I say strongest in a way that it would, the most intense, I think. And so between the ages of 20 and 25. So because it's not as we've got to put everything into its context when we're talking about the learning process and what I engage with. So for the first section, obviously I'm young. I didn't have anybody around really to teach me that sort of thing, and so I there was obviously a lot of processing through the mind when I started off this journey. And once you start processing energy through uniquely through the mind, you are susceptible to paranoia and anxiety. And it was a learning curve, a brutal learning curve that I had to sort of get my head round in that age, in that beginning part of that age of 20 to 25. I'll probably say in the first 2 years of it. And as I said, there was no one around at that time to explain to me. And it culminated in an accident in the ear and what have you, which sort of, in one way, it took the pressure off things, but also it increased the pressure in other things. But for the first 2 years, and certainly the thing with the mind is I was learning to focus my mind very much like a camera is focusing on one part of the picture that is in front of you. And the background may be blurred out, but the person in the foreground's in perfect focus. And I was learning to do that within my mind through the images, through things like that. And I would have thought around about the ages of 21, 22 was the moment I started realizing there was limitations to that, simply because it was starting to create more paranoia and anxiety than actually giving me solutions. And then I started opening up a lot more to the idea of what I was actually physically feeling, emotionally, with the world that is around me. And once I start involving the emotions and the mind, obviously they don't go together easily. It's a little bit like mixing water and oil. It doesn't really mix, and you need to shake it up a lot in order to make it mix, which can be is a bit of a gymnastics that you have to go through. So there seems to be this whole learning curve that I was going through, and then I started sort of seeing the auras, and I started physically seeing energy, which then takes up a whole new aspect to it, where you can convey or you can connect what you see in your inner vision, in your intuition, as it were, well, in your third eye, but also what you're feeling physically within your body, in the way of physical sensations, but also the emotional sensations, and then starting to see things, energetic fields around things changing and morphing according to my engagement with the energy. And I would have things like, it seemed, and I realised this earlier on today. I'd done that thumbnail because it's a picture I'd taken a long, long time ago when I was on the West Coast. But and I love that photograph. It always seems like a pathway towards the sun, as it were. The pathway to enlightenment, to an understanding, and that's what that photograph's all about. But as I started sort of playing around. And if you've seen that video on rhythms in life, the between the ages of 12 and 24, according to me, is the most experimental time of our life, because we're learning a lot about ourselves, what we've learned in the first 12 years, and putting it into practice. So I'm going for 20 to 24 is a very similar sort of thing. It's learning, and I wasn't really concerned whether I was getting it right, because I wasn't making massive decisions at that stage, certainly between 20 and 23. And when I sort of was in line with energy, there's one particular time when the colours that were in the general field that was around me sort of broke down, and there seemed to be this golden light pathway that was in front of me. And I remember sickly, because I was sitting in a barn, because I was living on a farm at the time. I was living in a van on a farm, and I was sitting in the top section of the barn, and the pathway was going out of a doorway on the first floor of the barn, as it were. And so I had to jump out of that window, out of that doorway in the barn to outside. And that was fine, but it was a test. It was like energy was constantly testing me. So, and trying to see how far I'd go with energy. And I think energy does that. And that brought me to the idea that when I'm helping people to see energy, because everybody can see it, it's a training process. When I help people to actually physically see energy, I say to them that energy will only show you really what you're ready to see, to sort of protect you from, going right off the deep end. And I didn't seem to have that understanding when I was 20, 21, 22, 23, around that period there. I just went straight off the deep end, I think. I liken it to the big fromage, the big cheese came down and kicked me out of bed and said, right now, life's for living. Come on, what are you doing? Get out and live it. And that's when I started combining also spirits and so forth, and talking to spirits. So there was an accumulation of things. And that's when you live with energy, you may have a specialist aspect, but you can't, every part has its piece to play and its contribution to the understanding of the situation. And that's very much as well what I do when I'm in the healing sort of thing. I combine, certainly, when I've got someone sitting in front of me, it's you combine multitudes of different layers in order to get a better picture of what you're dealing with, so you can help the person out. But the first 20 to 23 was this whole process of a learning process, of a gradually like a lasagna, gradually creating layers and layers and layers. And I've got to say, if you want to live a life of energy, be prepared to do crazy stuff. And I mean crazy, it's not crazy as in human crazy. It's just like the biggest problem that you will find if you live according to energy is that the human world does not regulate itself to the same configurations as energy. And that can cause enormous amount of stress and strain on someone, because energy is telling you to live a particular way, or encouraging you to live in a particular way, but that particular way may not be conducive to living an everyday life. And squaring the two, that I found was the biggest challenge of living with energy. Because once you start taking into account everything and being in that state of mind where I can quite happily be walking down the road, I'll talk to someone down the road, but I'm still seeing energy and I'm still feeling the energy and I'm still making my, my decisions according to that. It's as much as if you can't see a car that's screeching out of control behind you, but you can hear it and you're conscious of it. So then obviously you're going to turn around and kind of go, oh, what's that car doing? So you get out of the way. It's a similar sort of thing. So you got to do everyday things while still being in the state of energy. And luckily, as I accumulated up to 25, when I was 25 years old, that's when it's almost as if I'd done my degree and it was now time to step into life and really start living by energy. And by that stage there, I'd been working in London and so forth at that point. And I've decided I wanted to become an organic farmer. And I knew there was a much bigger thing than that to be had in my life. But at that point, I decided to become an organic farmer doing, sort of, I wouldn't say fruit and vegetables. I'd say more sort of, tomatoes, courgettes and that sort of thing, the everyday stuff, as it were. And I thought, well, there's no way I can buy anything in the UK. I'm going to go to France. And it was really nice because it took a lot of pressure off because I couldn't speak any French. So it took a lot of pressure off that side. But everything and energy was sort of like telling me to go that way. Then I combined it with the synchronicities, the coincidences that were around me. Also, what I was feeling when I was confronting a certain subject, what the emotions were. Very much like we would be doing in normal life, but being a little bit on the fringe of society at that stage. And this is what I think I didn't explain about the pathway, did I? I didn't finish explaining about the pathway. That golden pathway brought, when I was sitting up in the barn, okay, go back to that, sorry. But it was like, because it's coming back on my mind now, it's like it was follow the yellow brick road, follow the yellow brick road. It was like a yellow brick road in front of me. Because anyway, and you do that. So when you're living with energy, you will do things, and sometimes the idea of going to live in France with not even being able to speak the language, when you're 24, it's obviously a lot easier than when you have probably when you're 30. It's probably actually a lot easier to do it when you're 45, when you've accumulated maybe a house to sell and everything like that. So you got your finances under control. But moving out there when I was 25, this is how you got to picture it with the context of the situation in the world in 1995 or 96, 97. There was only 270,000 websites. Google hadn't even been invented or didn't even have a website by that stage. Google, I think, came in 98. So you couldn't just kind of go, oh, what's this? Let me go and have a look at what someone says about it on YouTube. Everything, it was much easier, I think, in those times to live by energy then than it is now. I find it a lot more difficult to live in accordance with energy now than I did when I was 24, 25. And that could be down to me, my age. It could be down to a lot of things. But I think it's due to the fact that we don't have to trouble ourselves to look for the answers from within and the world that is around me, around you. So it's like, I find it much more difficult to live with energy now. And there's another context as well, which we should put into play, which is the whole pole shift thing. I think the whole pole shift energy now is enormously different in the energy fields now than what it was 25 years ago in 2000. In 2000, it was really easy, very much more logical to deal with. And the energy now can be blowing one way 1 second, and then blow the next second. And energy itself is in this moment of inversion perpetually, in a way. And so I think it's a lot more difficult to live in the energy stream than what it was before. Now, obviously, if you were a priest living in, or a priestess living in a monastery somewhere, it could be a lot easier to live with energy. But then that's because of the limited demands upon you in regards to the outside world. So if you limit the inputs from the outside world, it is far easier to live with energy than to not. And when I mean living with energy, it's quite literally, it's one of your biggest guides that's helping you to make decisions in your life. And I've made, people can be testament to this. I've made decisions that people have kind of went, what, why? And it's because the energy is saying, look, this is what needs to be experienced, or this is what needs to be pushed in energy at the moment. So it was, you've got to, if you're really going to live with energy, there is another thing as well. That's what I'd like to say as well. There is another thing as well, which is back in those early days when I was 20 to 25, until I moved to France. I also learned, mainly when I was 25, how to turn it off, how to turn off the energy, because it can become so intense, simply because, as I said earlier on, energy for the beginning part, when you really get into living life with energy, you end up, as I say, it will only show you what you're ready to see. The more you take, the more steps you go forward, the further energy will take you. And it took me into places that are phenomenal. And I'm really chuffed and fortunate to been able to sacrifice a lot of my time to it. I say sacrifice, that's probably not the best word, but give a lot of my time to it, which is the biggest thing. If you're working in a job 45, 50 hours a week, it's really difficult. And incredibly difficult to work with energy or live with energy. And I was lucky enough to spend the last 25 years really of my life, 20 years of my life, working as a healer and here in France, and working in it on a daily basis. And was obviously made it incredibly easy to live with energy. But if you're not working in the world of energy, and it is a part of the world which intrigues me even more, and I like to explore it, is trying to introduce energy into our everyday lives, such as business, such as family dynamics, such as friends and so forth. Bringing it into that life can be incredibly complicated. So it depends how far you want to go and how far you want it to affect your life. I will say though that when you live as energy, as the guiding influence within your life, it simplifies everything. And because energy is all about exploration, that's what its goal is, to explore the spaces in time and everything. And as it explores that space and you go as well into that space, you discover a lot of things about yourself. You look at other dimensions, you look at spirits, you're looking at energy fields of people, of animals, of plants. You're combining a lot of things. So it's a very rich, and but because it all works to the same um, laws of nature in a way, it's actually really quite logical and um, it's quite easy to live. It's quite easy to live, to be satisfied and so forth. But it can, when once you start mixing in the human world, it can become incredibly difficult. And that's why we have a lot of crossover activities such as yoga, meditation, chanting, dancing, sport. Because sport is a form of meditation. When someone's in the zone, when they're playing sport, they're meditating, really. That's what they're doing. Even cooking. And that's what another thing when I had my healing school, that was one of the things I was trying to encourage people to do, that everything you do, regardless of what it is, mowing the lawn or cooking the meal, try and do it with consciousness, and once you start evolving your consciousness, you get into all the tastes, the smells, the temperatures, the everything. You get into the whole sort of shooting match of what makes an absolutely amazing meal. And so then it's actually a lot easier to deal with it when you're doing your daytime job or whatever, or looking after the kids. It's becomes actually a lot easier to do once you take those first steps and start not worrying about what energy is saying, but rather having it as a like hearing. You don't worry about hearing, you just hear, and you process it without thinking about it. In a way, you do the after process of kind of go, what was that noise? And that you do get a bit of that with energy as well, constantly. And it's a similar sort of things, but it's getting quicker at processing it, and like everything, it's much easier to do when you practice it, when you actually do, you do get involved in energies and so forth. So yeah, it's not easy living with energy. I wish I could tell you it was just uh, it, it is the most amazing thing in the world. Obviously, that is without shadow of doubt. There's sensations and emotions and sensations, but not just sensations within the body, but sensations out of the body. And there's so many things that are so euphoric when you're doing it, and it's absolutely amazing. It's just when you need to involve the rest of the world that it can become quite difficult. So using these sort of crossover things, such as meditation and so forth, uh, I think is an incredibly good start to start living with energy. Is it possible to live with energy solely? Yes, but the only way that can happen is if, the only way that can happen is if you're prepared to really live outside the mainstream of life. Once you live outside the mainstream of life, it's a lot easier to deal with. But living within the mainstream of life, it's not the easiest of things. And you know the number of clients that come and see me that we're having to deal with, anxiety problems, sleep problems, bouts of emotional angers or real sort of emotional spikes that are difficult to control. That seems to be the biggest blockage for most people of living with energy. They understand, most people understand the concept and the perception of it all and everything like that. But actually going ahead and living it is really quite difficult when it's you've got the outside world to deal with, because some of the laws, human laws, are just madness. It's the best way to explain it. Just look at tax laws. They're just, some of them are just completely and utterly loopy, and it's a bit of a game, a distraction, a game of distraction. And if we don't distract, then maybe we could really build something else. So I was, I was out walking earlier on in the village that I used to live in, and I saw, I said, and I went walking with my neighbour, and we were talking about a barn for sale and everything like that, and they're sort of saying, well, if you want that place, you've got to play the political thing with the local mayor and all of with the administration and stuff like that. And I said, I don't want to play that game, and because I'm not like that. I don't want to contribute to that whole sort of power struggle game sort of thing. And because I didn't want to contribute to it, they said, they were saying to me, well, you're going to lose. And I'm kind of going, well, at some point, someone's got to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to play that game. If that game is detrimental, if you perceive that game as being detrimental to the entire world, then, you're not going to do it. And that's a little bit like energy within the connection to everything that is around you. At some point, if we do want to live in energy, really, and I think if we do, it would signal a huge advancement, an evolutionary process, technologically, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, energetically. There's loads of things that can really project forward if we can just get past the idea of self-governance and be much more sort of in trust in one another than having to put down laws because someone's going to take them, someone's going to take the Michael, as they say in English, someone's going to take the Mickey, and Mickey Mouse having a laugh, isn't it? And yeah, so if we can get to that stage there where we don't have to worry about people, just think of the advancements we can do, and I think that's what the common sense evolution is all about. So at this present time, I think it's a lot more difficult to live a life of pure energy. It's really, really difficult than it was 30 years ago when I was really starting to live it. And there is fundamental things that need to change in order for us to really live in accordance with energy. And I think that will, the more and more that technology integrates with our spirit, the more and more we have to be conscious of that. That we have to have less laws and regulation. I know that sounds frightening because you can turn around and kind of go, well, anybody can take anybody could do someone wrong and stuff like that. And yeah, I totally agree with that. But, the more restrictions, the more laws we need, because we haven't worked it out, the more difficult it's going to be to live a life of energy. So I think I am taking, and I've done this all the way through my life with energy. I'm take that stance of sort of saying, energy doesn't need to change. People really fundamentally doesn't need to change. We just need to change the way we govern and I wouldn't say control or conduct or as custodians that we seem to think we are. Although I'm not 100% convinced on that, but as custodians of the planet, we need to, in synchronicity with everything that goes around us, that's what we need to get to in order for it to really work and for everything to happen. And I guarantee, well, I don't guarantee you, I'm not allowed to promise anything. There's only one thing I'll promise you is that I'll never promise you anything. Okay. Um, the thing with energy is the moment we start doing that, that's when we can really work on the manifestation side of things. And who there's I'm doing a lot of stuff on quantum mechanics at the moment, a lot of learning through quantum mechanics in particular, entanglement and particle sort of physics. It's a weird thing I love doing. And maybe in the future we may well be able to um, have a situation of mind over matter and go back to those days. And I think we need to go through pole shift before this actually really happens, but to go back to those days that actually we could use energy to build massive pyramids and Stonehenge and so forth, because that's all about that, using energy in a completely different way. I've forgotten who said it. Someone said it last week about do you think it was aliens that constructed the old sort of sites like Stonehenge and places in Machu Picchu or whatever, in South America, or the pyramids and so forth. And I think we've all got this, we've got this alien DNA in us, and that comes from the Adam and Eve section of life, where we were introduced to life that came from elsewhere, and I don't have a problem with that. And it certainly helped us in an evolutionary process within our mental sort of side of things. But we conquered energy. Well, I didn't say conquered. Conquer's not a very nice way, but we came in a line to energy, so we could use energy as a force for creating other things. And I think that's where the quantum mechanic comes into it as well. So maybe in the future, there's no reason why, levitating big stones and levitating ourselves maybe will be possible. I'm not saying we're all going to turn into Superman or woman, but it would certainly cut down the pollution, wouldn't it? So, have you got? Obviously, I'd like to open this up to questions because I can go whittling on for hours just in case. If anybody's got any questions, I also said in the readings this week that if you had any questions on the readings, any particular sort of questions on stuff like that. But and it can be any question that like, doesn't even have to be stuck to this topic that we're talking about. I'm whittling on about tonight. Could be about anything really. But energy, it seems so defined, energy. It's like, I think it's the purest analysis of the situation that we can have, the most balanced view of balanced connection that we could ever have with energy. Much more than, say, like mental logic or emotional sensations and things like that. The energy seems to be that whole sort of staff of Tot, the kinesis, where you get the plus and the minus, or the two snakes that go up the staff, as it were. And it gives us the spherical view of everything, rather than just a linear view of things, like logic, like emotions, and so forth. And because it's inverting at the moment, it is very difficult to latch on a long-term sort of goal with energy. It's much more like waves on a beach, catching one wave after another. But do you have any experiences on your side? Has anybody had any experiences they wish to share with everyone about, like living with energy and so forth? It's or if you've got any questions about it or not. Um, yeah, you learn everything. This is the other thing about energy as well. It's like when you're good and bad doesn't exist with energy. Okay, it doesn't look at things like that. It looks at it like a very much like an electromagnetic field where you have your sort of like your plus and your minuses and so forth. Um, but you've also got like your plus and your minuses, but that's in a directional force more than anything else. So when you start living and working with energy, you you cut out a lot of the extremes in a way and go straight to the point when you're working or when you're going in a direction, so you feel a lot more confident. I feel a lot more confident and a lot more sure about where I'm going and what I'm doing because of that, because there's no good or bad, should I, shouldn't I. That's the only real question, rather than why should I do this and why should I do that. And once you get involved in the human world, that's when you get a lot more the why rather than should I and stuff like, rather than should I. So it's very purifying, and you end up. Energy doesn't like repeating itself at all. It doesn't like sending energy over the same ground. If it does keep sending it over the same ground, that becomes a fixed characteristic for you, energetically speaking. But once you start exploring life with energy, that's when energy will help you to learn very, very quick about things. And once you've learned a lot about things, then you can't deny what you've learned, and you can't go back over it, and you can't pretend you haven't learned it. So it does. I felt like I've experienced a lot of different sort of situations because of energy, because that is what its goal is to experience. And it doesn't necessarily mean traveling around the world. You could do that, wherever you are. Could do that in London, no worries. It's the experience which is the most important part. So yeah, so living with energy for me is a little bit like that. Did that sort of like, is that understandable? Um, and I've got to say, when I was younger, there was times when I was kind of going. There was times when I was really kind of going, energy. I don't understand why you're asking me to do that. And I would kind of say I can't do that, and it's knowing. Maybe it does test you in a way to sort of saying, see if we can fool that person. Then therefore it can't be reliable, because you don't want to just follow it blindly in a way. I don't think energy wants that either. I think it wants you to follow energy consciously. I think that seems to be the most important sort of healthy boundaries that we can have between energy and oneself. And so yeah, living life with energy is it does help you to learn a lot very, very quickly, and it is all about the experience as well. So, and it's, as I say, it's very difficult to do that in everyday life. If you're doing a 9 to 5, it's sometimes difficult to involve it in one's life. And you do it on, we all do it. We do it on smaller levels, in doses that we can do. And learning to turn it off was really important. So I can turn it off and be totally within the human world, and do things within the human world because the human world asked me to do it. Otherwise, they'll put me in prison or whatever. So there is a whole sort of process that goes on between between the two worlds, the human world and the energy world. It's a very, we need the human, there needs to be, the human world needs to evolve. And if it doesn't evolve, then, you know, it's going to be very difficult to arrive at a free, evolved, energetic being of the future. It will more likely be a controlled, contrived energy being of the future through the technology. And that's where we got to be a little bit wary between the technology, the limits and stuff like that. I'm not saying, oh, certainly you can't just kind of go, right, get rid of all technology, because that's just not going to happen, is it? You know, it may be forced on us with the event, but at the moment it's not going to happen. But we could consciously choose, and that's what we have to do individually. It's when a company does a bad thing or does a thing that could be looked upon as not a very creative thing, much more of a destructive thing. The people who purchase or buy that product from that company will stop buying from that company, and that company will then have financial difficulties. And if we consciously started doing this, before you know it, things would get weeded out quite quickly. The problem we have at the moment, obviously, is the fact that, you know, established companies are not going to allow other companies to come through, because they're going to be, you know, stealing their piece of the pie, as it were. And I don't think companies would enjoy that. And I think this is where we come into the idea of proprietary, of owning something, where we don't actually own something and we can start using things rather than owning it. And if we can start doing that, then maybe there's a massive evolutionary step coming up. But there's major technology that needs to change as well in order for this to happen. Because if you work on the computers or the technology we have at the moment, which is all based upon resistance rather than flow, as it were, it will be resisting the spirit. And we, as beings, should not really, I think, relinquish the part of our spirit to give it over to technological sort of people and companies and so forth. If you're going to live with energy, the technology and companies should, in theory, follow that trend of what we would like to live in regards to energy. If it doesn't follow that trend in what we wish to live in energy, then it will become obsolete. It will not be needed. And one of the reasons why it may not follow it is because it may not play to the control aspect that some people are hell-bent on. And, they do lally the idea that I find it laughable, the idea that some people, there's a very few amount of people that think that they're running vast numbers of people. And, I was talking about this earlier on with Tanya about the idea of, tribes and stuff like that. And I think we need to become a lot more local than we do need international. And that technological side can allow us to have that international side without us going overboard. And maybe it's a case of going back to very much smaller communities and so forth, which I think would be a lot better. Because even within cities, you find there's individual smaller communities. But to live with energy, you need to. There is major shifts that need to happen, and they are happening at the moment. I was talking about the common sense revolution. What was I talking? I was talking about that about 18 months ago, 2 years ago. It's got to be at least 18 months ago when I first started talking about the be prepared. This is the common sense revolution that's coming down the line. And we are there. We're fully into it at the moment. And that common sense, this is where energy can work with common sense. Energy can't work with erratics, energies, erratic ideas and so forth, or sporadic ideas, whatever it is. It works with a lot more with consistency. And this is where common sense come into play, that we must be able to understand that there's certain things that we don't even need to discuss between us because we know that that's actually a good idea. Like simple things of not bringing the end of another person's existence upon this planet, through vengeance or anything like that. I think that's common sense within everybody. I think and that's what I mean. There's no discussion about it. That's just plain simple common sense. And the moment we can start actually allowing that common sense to come through to a much smaller aspect of life in very small increments, that's when we can really start living with energy and things can start flowing with energy. If you've got any questions, I can see the comments. They do come up a little bit later on, so it's sometimes difficult to sort of see them always coming through when they're supposed to come through. One's own shadow work is is of the utmost importance. Oh, most certainly. And the thing is, it's not a case of beating your shadow, is it? That's peace, levy, dove. Peace, love, dove. Peace, love, dove. First time I've seen you here, I think. Pleased to see you. I don't know if I've seen you before. I don't know if you've been to the channel before, but lovely to see you. Yeah, I think shadow work is hugely important. Massively important. And do that for the first, as I was saying, for the first sort of 5-6 years when I was like 20 to 25. That's what it was all about. It was digging out the the side that comes up and self-sabotages you or takes you down the road because your ego gets a bit carried away. Totally agree with that. Yeah, it's totally all about is very important. Yeah. And it's not a case of beating your shadow either. Your shadow then becomes something, your shadow self becomes a really valuable tool for you because it helps you to see what you don't want in multitudes of ways and helps you to see when you feel like a situation is not really good for you or good for energy or good for others around you, And that's why we do that. And no one else can do that work. Only you can do that work on your shadow side. And everybody has it like the yin and the yang. And it's like you can't just ignore it and you can't beat it either. Because the more you beat it, the bigger it will get. And it's so I wouldn't try and beat it, your shadow side, that's for sure. I would definitely get more into the idea of, yeah, it is... excuse me, one. Knowing your shadow side and understanding your shadow side is incredibly important. I think it's a lot easier to understand your shadow side now, bizarrely enough, than it was before we had technology. Because we can look up things a lot quicker. And it was a lot slower process of learning things in the past. But then when I do my when I'm doing my healing and so forth, and you get the karmic blocks in people, the karmic blocks have been changed. I think really the major change came between between 95 and 2005. That's when the karmic block itself, which is our sort of what am I here to experience or what I should learn in this life, changed enormously. And it was much more it was a lot quicker. So it was all built upon light and flow, coming onto this flow sort of thing. than it was with a block, because it was a karmic block before, like a square block. And that tied in line with the technology as well at the same time. So, yeah, peace, love, dove, most definitely. One's own shadow work is of the utmost importance. I totally agree with that, 100%. Yeah. And I think it's very interesting as well. It doesn't have to be a traumatic experience working with one's shadow self. It can be really enjoyable. Most humor is built upon dark ideas. So you can, if you got that humorous bent in you, it would help to deal with your shadow side. But living with energy, also living and understanding that you are going to feel things and know things that may put you in a problematic situation. When your intuition really starts kicking in, and many times I've had people come and see me for healing and so forth, and I know they're lying to me when they're telling me about something. I know they're lying to me, but I'm not going to call them out, because they're not at that stage to understand the lie that they're saying to themselves, if you understand what I mean. And I think that's also a part of the shadow work as well. And but energy will show you things that you've got to be prepared to understand. So, for example, in 2000, I had the energy was shot all over the place. Really shot all over the place in early summer. All over the place for me personally. And I was convinced that there was, I'm still quite young then. It's 25 years ago. Not that I'm not that old now, but anyway, I was convinced that there was going to be, the main thing that was going through my head was the idea that there was a plane was going to crash into my house while I was in France. And I was really concerned about it. And then we had 9/11 that came out afterwards. And it was so intense, and it came so much out of the blue. It was difficult to put all the components together. It was really, really difficult to put all the components together. And only after the event did I realise and kind of went, oh, right, of course. And then another episode, which was in 2003, I think, when just before the earthquake at Bandahachi and the tsunami and everything like that was back in 2003, had exactly the same sort of spike of energy. Was a lot easier to deal with it. I knew that there was going to be a major input or major departure of souls or spirits, as it were, from this plane. And, but you've got to be prepared to, when you're living with energy, you've got to be prepared to open that up. You've got to be prepared to, have privy to sort of information that if you tell anybody around you, they'll probably turn around and kind of go, yeah. You're shot to pieces, my friend. And it's, very, very, can be quite hard sometimes. It can be quite hard sometimes. And, you've got to be, this is why I think this is when you want to live with energy, you've got to live with everything. You've got to live with the logical side. You've got to live with emotional, physical feelings, everything you see as well that is around you. The audible and the internal vision, stuff like that. What you see is maybe not what you get, but if you put it in, if you look at the Follow the Yellow Brick Road. What's that film called? I forgot. What's it? I forgot what the film's called. Follow the Yellow Brick Road film. I forgot what it's called. Blimey. When you in that film there, the wizard was behind the curtains, and they were just kind of hearing this booming voice, and it was all sort of ooh, very, very scary. And you're depending upon a lot of of all your other senses to rather than what you actually physically see. And then when you pull it back, it's just this person speaking down a microphone, this man speaking down a microphone. But at the same time, the wizard did get Dorothy back home. With the balloon. I think it was in a balloon or something like that. So he did what he said he was going to do. And even though it just sort of like he had to put on a whole show in order to make it be understood. And it's difficult. It's difficult sometimes to really get a head round, get our head round what energy is trying to tell us. And you've got to be prepared sometimes that it's going to be completely off the rails. So it's true that our DNA has been altered, spliced into, was it alternative versions of ourselves. So is it true that the DNA has been is it guilt? Hang on a second. I can't actually make this bigger. This screen. My eyes are shot to bits. Spliced into alternative versions of ourselves. I don't know if it's that. I don't. Yeah, it's very possible. Like the Dolores Cannon sort of thing you're talking about there. Yeah, that's from Peace, Love, Dove. Is that what you're saying? Sort of like there was a split of the human race at that point there. Yeah, I get along with that. I could understand that that we live on multitudes of dimensions. I think if we seriously went traveling in space, I think when we physically get to another place, it will be like another dimension. So I think, but I'm not so sure if it's. I don't think necessarily that we live in multitudes of dimensions at the same time. It's possible. It's very possible that we could only live one life, and I'm living another version of myself elsewhere. That's very, very possible. Yes, but it would need a different type of understanding than what we have already in order to engage in that in a very sincere and tangible way. But the way in which the DNA happened, as far as I can tell, so this is the Adam and Eve story. I think Eve came from somewhere else. So I think men are from Venus and women are from Mars. You'll have to hear me out on that one. But so I think Eve came first and she created Adam, personally. I think that's how it's been explained to me. And it only got turned on its head because males are physically stronger than females and said, no, it must have been a male and stuff like that. And I don't think so. I think Eve came from, and she brought with her another section of DNA, which then, when she could no longer have the DNA material in order to reproduce Adam, she started copulating or breeding with local humans, as it were. And I'm not talking about Neanderthals either. It's a particular thing. A badger and a dog look very similar, but you can. I don't think you can crossbreed them. And I think what happened there is basically she lived an incredibly long time because she came from Mars, and she could live a lot longer, and that gave birth to people who could live a lot longer, and etc. And it changed. She brought in a new form of DNA because the DNA changes each time we go through a pole shift, and I think that's what actually happened. she'd come from a race of humans that had been through the pole shift a multitudes amount of times, where therefore evolving their DNA in order to deal with the new energy configuration of the pole shift. And as she came to planet Earth at the time, um, which would have been considered a Garden of Eden, it would have been, you know, the most untouched thing. All the animals were already there and everything like that. And the idea that, and it was when we understood, we opened our eyes, and then everything was already there. So, the big cheese had already created everything, and she brought in with her, with the multitude of children and offspring, with new DNA, which then gradually became infiltrated into society, into the world, simply because those people could actually go a lot further than, or deal with the situations with famine and stuff like that a lot better, because they had a different DNA than what they didn't have. Hi Kim, how you doing? Was that yes or Dolores Cannon? Was that yes or yes? The new introduction of the DNA through Eve. Sometimes the comments have really lagged behind, so you might have commented this ages ago. But yeah, hi Kim, how you doing? Yeah, so yeah, I think that was when DNA was changed, basically, within the human being, because we can trace back our, everything has its DNA, and we can trace it back to certain number of DNA building blocks, and I'm talking about everything on the planet. The human race can be traced back to 7 males and 1 female, and I think this is where we come to the idea that Eve was that 1 female, you know. And that whole idea of the golden apple, if you look at the golden apple in regards of sacred geometry and so forth, you understand numerology, you understand the construction of particles, you can understand the construction of illnesses as much as of healing and so forth. That's that whole sort of Eve opened the eyes. And that's a little bit like, the idea of the snake that sort of, corrupted the human race, but it just corrupted the human race with knowledge and understanding in a way. I don't necessarily. And was that a good thing? I think the jury's still out on that. Was that a good thing? So the human ego I guess that's ego, must be put into check. Yeah, I think that's the shadow side as well. Peace, love, dove. I think that's the shadow side as well. I think the ego is a fantastic thing, and I think if you can live in harmony with your ego, so your ego is no longer, it becomes like a guide rather than actual like your central point, then it actually becomes a really good thing. The ego, it helps in a really good way. It helps with natural competition to try and achieve the greatest example of us being humans as a collective as well as individually. So the human ego, I'm my name is Lawless, so I think keeping it in check is not a good idea. I think understanding it, listening to it, making it your inner ego feel that it has its place at the table, but it's not the head of the table. It's much more of a round table than an elongated table. So I think the ego is a good thing. It can be an incredibly good thing, and it can be incredibly a bad thing. It's like anything. Anything can be bad. So yeah, the human ego is. Yeah, the human ego. Maybe if I read it correctly now, it's more the sort of human ego in the fact that we think we're superior to everything else, rather than an individual ego. Okay, if we, I think that's what you're trying to ask me actually. I'm now starting to get it. Yeah, the human ego as a collective thing is also a case of, you know, this is why, you know, when people say do aliens exist and the kind of sort of saying, it'd be very egotistical on our behalf to think that they don't exist. You know, it's really, you know, kind of like we're sort of saying, you know, we're so good that, you know, aliens can't, what can be better than us, surely, you know. Do I think aliens are better than us? No, I don't, not at all. I could do, we could do an evening because you know, I have encountered like I don't like saying it like this, but the Galactic Council, you know, and I have encountered them and everything like that, and I've, you know, discussed with them and everything like that. Do I think that aliens, everything's they're better than us, or they're more evolved than us, or they're more advanced consciously than us? No, I just think they've had more time than us. That's the only thing I think anything has got anything on something else. It's because on, you know, you've had more time to explore. I think the human has got an incredibly important lesson to convey to the universe, as much as the universe has got a lesson to convey to us. And I think that is part and parcel of the collective ego as well, you know. And I think it can be a good thing without being very presumptuous. So, you know, does it need to be kept in check? Yeah, probably. Probably, but I wouldn't encourage it. I would encourage everybody to be at au fait with our ego. So, you know, it helps you, helps us collectively, helps, and it's not actually us. So, yeah, the ego is quite a funny thing. Is there any other sort of like? Do we have any other sort of questions? Was there any other sort of questions on the on energy, on what it's like? You know, have you got any other experiences as well for living with energy? You know, it's I'll give you, obviously I'll give you my point of view, but I don't know what, if you've got any other sort of questions, because I will wrap it up in a minute, because I've been whittling on for an hour and 15. I don't mind whittling on. I love it, you know, and I do enjoy exploring it. But you know, I don't want to bore people stupid either. So yeah, there you go. Living with energy. Conclusion. Is it possible to live with energy? Yes, I think it is. It needs certain circumstances around you. You need to be living a particular type of life, I think. And energy is not money. Yeah, if someone's that, I don't like that at all. That idea, money is so dirty that to put energy in the same, even in the same phrase, is, I find that's really insulting. So yeah, I wouldn't say money is energy, and it doesn't follow the rules of energy either at all. So it's more the ego. But yeah, is it possible? It is possible, but you need to be very conscious of the circumstances of what you live. And if you are heavily involved in the human world, you've got to understand that there's certain rules and regulations, obviously, that may not necessarily adhere to living with energy. So it can be incredibly difficult. So don't ever be hard on yourself of getting something wrong or not doing it correctly, or you think you're not doing it correctly. I wouldn't worry about any of that. Anybody who's worth their salt in the way of energy, you know, who work in the energy world, they must, you know, the only way they can ever judge you on your energy work would be for their ego to be out of check, as Peace Love Dove would say. So you know, I'd be very gentle with oneself when trying to live a life of energy, because it can be incredibly difficult. So yeah, especially with the pole shift. So I think that's pretty much. I think I pretty much said everything I wanted to say on the way of which and how it is to live with energy. I don't know if you've got any other questions. Last chance for any questions regarding energy. And if anybody else has got an answer to that, more than welcome to sort of respond in the comments as much as my good self. Well, thank you very much for all the support, that you give the channel through the YouTube system. Because YouTube is a fickle old bet. Bizarrely enough, YouTube has only came around in 2005. So it's been very difficult to really difficult to sort of like before then to get instant gratification on your questions rather, questions according to energy. Oh, thank you, peace, love, dove. Yeah. When you go into energy, it tends to be very powerful, the info that comes out of it. So, yeah. There you go. I will see you during the week for the weeklies and stuff like that. I will be making changes to the channel in the future. It's not going to be within the very near future. And as I do, I will be explaining about what I want to change within the channel and how I want to sort of change the channel going forward to explore other avenues. But, you'll know about it, and it'd be good to discuss it all and see what you think as well from your side and stuff like that. But in the meantime, thanking you very much for all the support you give to this channel. Really do appreciate it. And yeah, I will see you all soon. In the meantime, don't forget, life should be fun. So please do enjoy.